Before forests stretched across the continents, before meadows swayed in the wind, before even the soft green fuzz of moss kissed a stone, Earth was silent. The Paleozoic landscape lay bare, untouched by the gentle touch of leaves. The ground was a wide canvas of rock, sand, and dust. Jagged cliffs jutted upward, scarred by eons of wind and rain. Plains stretched vast and endless, their silence broken only by the occasional crack of stone under shifting temperatures or the distant rumble of rivers carving new paths. The air was different then. To breathe, it would have been to taste sharpness, to feel a thinness unfamiliar to us today. Oxygen was present, but it had not yet reached the lush abundance we take for granted when we fill our lungs. The wind swept freely, but it carried no perfume of flowers, no earthy scent of soil after rain. Instead, it smelled of stone, of salt from the oceans, and of minerals rising with the morning mist. It was a world elemental in its purity, sky, sea, and rock, bound together in an austere symphony. Imagine yourself walking through such a world, not as a traveler of flesh and blood, but as a drifting spirit, unseen, hovering just above the earth. Beneath your steps lies a landscape utterly untouched by greenery. The soil is raw, lifeless, more dust than earth. No roots weave their silent networks below, no seeds sleep beneath the surface, waiting to awaken. After the storms, rains gather briefly in shallow pools, only to slip away into cracks and rivulets. Without plants, the land cannot hold water. Rivers flow wild and restless, carving canyons with no resistance, carrying with them fragments of mountains that crumble piece by piece into the sea. And yet life was not absent. If you drifted to the ocean's edge, you would see hints of green. In the tidal pools and along the shallows, delicate algae floated and shimmered like emerald threads. They painted small patches of color against the gray and brown of stone, glowing faintly under the light of the sun. These fragile organisms were bound to the water, clinging to its embrace. The land beyond the tide was still alien, a place unwelcoming and harsh. And yet, within these pools lay the promise of a future transformation, the whisper of something greater to come. Mountains loomed above, their peaks hidden in passing clouds. Storms rolled across their shoulders, hurling sheets of rain and echoing with thunder. Lightning struck the ridges, splitting stone, sending fragments tumbling downward. But when the deluge passed, the land did not bloom. The rainwater vanished quickly, sliding into gullies or soaking into cracks, leaving the ground as stark and dry as before. Without roots to anchor it, soil was carried away by the currents. The land reshaped itself endlessly, slopes collapsing, plains eroding, rivers wandering in new courses. This world was still young, restless, and waiting. There was beauty in its austerity. Picture dawn breaking across a Paleozoic valley, the sun rising, its golden light spilling across bare rock and shining seas. The cliffs glow with hues of amber and rose. The wind carries mist inland, drifting like thin veils across the ground. The oceans glisten silver and blue, rolling ceaselessly toward the barren shores. In that moment, Earth is both quiet and vast, its silence humming with potential. You would feel it in the air, a sense of anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. For soon it would change. Tiny pioneers would emerge from the waters, their presence humble yet transformative. They would not roar or stride or dominate. Instead, they would creep softly across the land, mats of mosses clinging to stone, delicate liverworts stretching across damp soil, filmy green threads weaving together across tidal flats. From their arrival, everything would shift. The air would grow richer, the soils would deepen, the cycles of rain and rivers would change. Where once there was only silence, there would be whispers, the rustle of leaves, the sigh of forests, the gentle hum of life bound to land. This is the story of that transformation, a story not of sudden conquest, but of patience, resilience, and quiet persistence. Plants would arrive slowly, step by step, yet with each root that gripped the soil and each frond that unfurled toward the sky, the Earth's destiny was rewritten. They were the architects of air, the builders of soil, the silent guardians of life's expansion. And so we begin, here in the stillness before the green, looking out over barren stone and restless waters. Settle in, dear listener, as we walk together through time, watching the world turn from silence into song. For this is how the earth became green. Long before the first fern unfurled in a shaded glade or the first tree lifted its crown toward the sun, life lingered in the embrace of the seas. The oceans of the Paleozoic were not empty. They pulsed with currents, shimmered with sunlight, and carried within them the seeds of the green world to come. Here, in shallow lagoons and tidal flats, floated the quiet architects of the future, algae small and unassuming, yet extraordinary in their potential. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of an ancient shoreline. The air smells of salt, of minerals carried in from the restless waves. Before you stretches a shallow sea, its waters tinted with hints of green where sunlight penetrates. Beneath the surface, delicate filaments of algae drift and sway, their movements gentle, almost dreamlike. They cling to rocks, they gather in mats, they form colonies that turn the shallows into living carpets. In their tiny, thread-like bodies, they hold the very process that will one day shape the world: photosynthesis, the quiet alchemy that turns light into life. The algae lived in rhythm with the tides. With each rise and fall of the sea, they were lifted, swirled, and pressed against the stones. In tidal pools, where the water lingered after the ocean withdrew, they found refuge. Pools shimmered like scattered jewels across the rocky shore, each one a tiny universe, alive with green threads floating beneath the surface. Within them, sunlight streamed down through the clear water, touching every cell, igniting the invisible dance of energy. And though silent, their presence was transformative. Each strand absorbed carbon dioxide, releasing oxygen in return. With every breathless moment beneath the waves, they were reshaping the very air of Earth. Slowly, patiently, they fed the skis. Though invisible to the eyes of the world at large, they were preparing the stage for something vast. Yet for all their strength, they remained bound. Algae belonged to the water. Their fragile bodies could not withstand the dryness of land, the harsh touch of wind, or the searing glare of an unfiltered sun. They thrived where moisture wrapped around them, where waves embraced their delicate structures. Beyond the tide, the rocks and soil waited, silent and bare. It was a threshold that seemed insurmountable, but nature has always been patient, and the whispers of life were already leaning toward the shore. Consider the shoreline itself. It was a place of transition, neither sea nor land, but something in between. Rocks gleamed wet and slippery, coated in thin films of algae. Tiny rivulets of water trickled back toward the ocean, carrying with them fragments of green. Here, life experimented. Some filaments found ways to cling tighter, holding fast to stone against the retreating tide. Others endured the dryness just a little longer before the next wave swept over them. In these moments of survival, adaptation quietly began. The whispers in the water were not loud, but they were persistent. Algae, with their fragile forms, were writing the first notes of a song that would echo across millions of years. Each strand carried resilience, each colony hinted at possibilities that reached beyond the sea. They were not yet plants as we know them, but they were the ancestors of mosses, of ferns, of towering forests, yet unborn. And in their quiet persistence, they gave more than oxygen. They gave stability, weaving themselves into mats that softened the shoreline. They trapped sediments, slowed currents, and shaped the environment around them. They were not only surviving, they were preparing the land itself for the first footsteps of greenery. If you linger by that ancient shore, you might hear it, the subtle symphony of life emerging. The waves hiss as they retreat, the pools sparkle in the sunlight, and beneath the water's surface, the algae sway. Though voiceless, they speak of patience, of resilience, of the promise of what will come. They are the whispers in the water, the earliest murmurs of the forests to come. In time, these whispers will become roots. They will become stems and leaves, stretching upward into the air. But for now, they float quietly in the shallow seas, breathing, growing, waiting. They are the green breath before the dawn of land. The sea was home, but the shoreline was a temptation. It was a liminal space, neither fully land nor fully water, a place of shifting tides and endless change. Twice each day, the waters withdrew, pulling back to reveal damp rocks, slick sands, and shallow pools. For the algae drifting in the shallows, this was both danger and opportunity. Picture an ancient shoreline beneath a hazy Paleozoic sky. Waves roll in with steady rhythm, their crests crowned in white foam. Each crash sends a shiver through the ground, each retreat leaves behind a glittering mosaic of pools. These pools, shallow and warm beneath the sun, were nurseries of transformation. Algae clung to the edges of stone, their filaments slick with moisture, shimmering green in the light. Some were stranded in thin sheets of water, trembling as the tide pulled away. Here on this borderland, the first steps toward land began, not with bold leaps, but with gentle persistence. Each tide tested their endurance. Some algae dried out under the harsh sun and perished, their delicate threads crumbling to dust. Yet others survived just long enough for the tide to return, long enough to continue the ancient dance of photosynthesis. Each small success mattered, a quiet rehearsal for a much greater migration yet to come. The shoreline itself seemed to beckon. Rocks glistened wet in the morning light, their surfaces etched with rivulets where water ran back to the sea. Each rivulet carried fragments of life, tiny spores, filaments, and cells up onto the edges of land. In the cracks of stone and hollows where water lingered, these pioneers found pockets of safety. For hours, even days, they endured outside the sea, bathed in moisture that clung stubbornly to stone. And with each generation, the survivors grew just a little more resilient. There was something enchanting about this space. Imagine standing at the edge of such a shore at dusk, when the tide retreats under the watchful glow of a fading sun. The pools gleam like liquid mirrors, reflecting colors of rose and amber. Within them, the algae rest in silence, their filaments swaying gently in the soft current of trapped water. Above them, gullies and rocks stand bare, yet damp, carrying the memory of the sea. It is in these still moments that you sense the pull, the shoreline calling life forward into a new world of possibility. Adaptations emerged slowly, but they were profound. Some algae developed thicker walls, tiny shields against desiccation. Others produced spores encased in protective coats, allowing them to endure longer outside water before returning to the sea's embrace. Each small innovation opened the door a little wider. The line between ocean and land was not a barrier, but a threshold, and life was learning how to cross it. The shoreline also offered something irresistible: sunlight. In the water, light was filtered and softened, scattered by currents and waves. But above the tide, it poured down unbroken, golden, and full of energy. To algae accustomed to dimmer rays beneath the sea, this abundance was intoxicating. The promise of energy, of growth, beckoned them ever closer to land. And yet the invitation was not without cost. The shoreline was harsh, unpredictable. The same sun that promised energy could scorch and kill. The same winds that whispered across the pools could dry and desiccate. The stones that held precious water could also abandon it in the heat of day. But evolution thrives in difficulty, and each challenge became a lesson. Each tide was a test, and each survivor carried forward knowledge etched into its being. The shoreline was a place of transition, a proving ground. In these fragile, shimmering pools and damp crevices, the ancestors of plants rehearsed for their great migration. They were not yet ready to blanket the land, not yet prepared to weave roots into soil and raise forests skyward. But they were learning. With every ebb of the tide, with every whispered promise of sunlight and air, they grew closer to the moment when land would no longer seem alien, but home. So the shoreline waited, and life lingered there, caught between two worlds. The invitation had been made, and though the answer would take millions of years to unfold, the first steps had already been taken. The whispers in the water had found a voice upon the stones, and soon that voice would grow into a chorus of green. The shorelines had whispered, the tidal pools had beckoned, and now ever so gently life accepted the invitation. It began not with towering trees or sprawling forests, but with something small, delicate, and humble. Tiny green bodies pressed themselves against damp stone, spreading across the cracks and crevices in soft, cushion-like mats. These were the mosses and their kin, the earliest pioneers of the land. Imagine the first appearance of moss upon a barren world. Where once only rock glittered wet with spray, now a subtle green fuzz began to emerge, like a painter's first stroke across a bare canvas. It did not happen all at once, but slowly, patch by patch, as spores carried by water or wind found moist cradles in which to grow. In the dim morning light, the moss shimmered faintly, its tiny leaves no larger than the head of a pin. And yet, in their unassuming presence, they began to soften the face of the earth. Unlike their algal ancestors, mosses were not bound entirely to the sea. They could cling to stone, to soil, to barkless wood that had fallen from the earliest proto-trees. They needed moisture, yes, they drank it directly through their leaves, for they had no roots in the way we know them today. But this dependence tethered them to damp environments, to shaded poolsides and dripping rocks where dew lingered. Still, it was enough. By holding tightly to the land, they became the first permanent green upon Earth's face. Walk with me through such a scene. A stream winds its way through rocky highlands, its edges slick with water from last night's rain. Along the bank, tiny colonies of moss cluster together, forming emerald cushions on the stone. The air is cool, and every surface glitters with beads of water. Kneel close, and you would see a miniature forest, tiny stems rising only millimeters tall, each capped with delicate spore capsules like lanterns ready to release their contents. It is a world within a world, where every drop of water is a lake, and every pebble is a mountain. The mossy pioneers were builders as much as they were survivors. In clinging to stone, they began the long work of breaking it down. Their bodies, when they lived and when they died, created the earliest traces of soil. The green mats trapped dust, held moisture, and softened the hard crust of earth. Over time, the land itself changed beneath their touch, turning from lifeless rock to a foundation that could support more. It was slow work, patient, quiet, almost invisible, but it was the beginning of fertile ground. And in their softness, they brought something new to the land: beauty. Picture the cliffs at dawn, once stark and gray, now softened by patches of green velvet. Water trickles down the face of stone, catching in the moss and sparkling in the light. Birds did not yet fly, insects had only just begun to explore the land, and yet the stage was being set. The mosses, though simple, gave Earth her first clothing, her first comfort, her first touch of life beyond the sea. The mosses also taught resilience. They had no roots to dig deep, but they clung stubbornly with rhizoids, tiny filaments that anchored them to stone. They could dry out when the sun grew harsh, shrinking back into dormancy, and then awaken again when the rains returned. In this way, they endured. Their lives were humble, but their persistence was unmatched. And when the wind stirred, carrying their spores across valleys and streams, new colonies would arise wherever water could touch the land. Slowly, silently, they spread. From cliffs to riversides, from damp hollows to shadowed caves, mosses traced green paths across the Paleozoic Earth. Their presence was small in stature, but monumental in meaning. For the mosses were not just survivors, they were heralds. They were the first real claimants of land, the trailblazers who prepared the way for forests, for meadows, for jungles. Without them, the soil would never have deepened, the land would never have softened, and the earth would not yet have been ready for the towering plants to come. So it was that in the quietest of ways, the first mosses became the pioneers of the land. They covered the world's wounds of stone with blankets of green. They whispered that life could belong here, that land could be more than barren rock. And in time, their soft carpets would welcome the roots and trunks of greater plants, who would grow upon the soil the mosses themselves had sown. The green had arrived, and though it was still fragile, still small, it had begun a transformation that would echo for ages. The mossy pioneers had taken the first true step. Life on land is rarely a solitary endeavor. From the beginning, survival here required partnerships, and among the earliest and most vital of these alliances was the bond between plants and fungi. It is a story that unfolded beneath the surface, hidden from sight, yet it shaped the very possibility of life's expansion onto Earth's dry continents. Picture the first mosses and liverworts clinging to damp stone. Their delicate bodies spread across rock faces, capturing light and moisture, but beneath them, in the thin cracks and shadows, something else stirred. Fine, thread-like strands of fungi, the mycelium, crept silently through the crevices of stone. They branched and wove like unseen lace, reaching into places the plants could not. Where the plants' rhizoids gripped rock but failed to draw nutrients, the fungi succeeded. They dissolved minerals from stone, unlocking phosphates and other treasures buried deep within the earth. It was here, in this meeting of moss and mycelium, that one of nature's oldest pacts was born. The plants, through their quiet alchemy of photosynthesis, made sugars, food woven from sunlight and air. The fungi, in turn, offered minerals and water drawn from the soil. It was an exchange as elegant as it was essential. Each gave what the other could not, and together they flourished in ways neither could alone. Imagine kneeling beside an early patch of moss on a Paleozoic hillside. To the eye, you see green cushions spread across stone, tiny stems glistening with dew. But imagine for a moment that your vision shifts beyond what the human eye can see, and beneath the moss, you glimpse the glowing threads of fungi. They snake outward in delicate, endless webs, mingling with the rhizoids of plants, forming connections unseen. It is like witnessing a secret handshake between two kingdoms of life, an agreement that whispers, "We survive together." This partnership was more than survival, it was transformation. By breaking down stone and drawing out nutrients, fungi accelerated the making of soil, and with every decaying body of moss and every spreading filament of fungus, the ground softened. Dust mixed with life, and soil was born, a cradle for roots yet to come, a canvas for forests yet unborn. What had been lifeless rock was slowly, patiently becoming earth. In this alliance, the fungi also offered something subtler: stability. Their underground webs anchored the plants, holding them steady against wind and rain. Together, they wove strength into fragility, ensuring that the pioneers on land could endure the uncertainties of this new world. Without fungi, the first plants might never have persisted long enough to spread. Without plants, the fungi would have lacked the steady food of sugars. Together, they forged a pact that still endures in nearly every root and forest today. Pause for a moment and reflect on the intimacy of this bond. It was not loud, not dramatic. No thunder split the skies to mark the moment of alliance. Instead, it was quiet, hidden in the soil, whispered in the silence beneath mossy carpets. And yet, from this humble exchange arose everything we now know: meadows blooming with flowers, forests echoing with birdsong, fields feeding civilizations. It began here, with plants and fungi finding one another in the shadows of stone. The earth itself seemed to respond. Where once rivers scoured bare landscapes, they now slowed, their banks softened by green and anchored by invisible threads. Where once rain vanished into cracks, it now lingered, held by the sponge-like mats of moss and fungus. The air, too, grew sweeter, as plants exhaled oxygen into the sky in ever greater measure. The partnership was not simply between two life forms, it was between life and earth itself. Even today, if you walk through a forest and kneel to touch the soil, you are touching this ancient story. Beneath your fingertips lie countless fungal threads, still bound in quiet covenant with roots. They trade sugars and minerals, water and strength, just as they did in the Paleozoic dawn. Every towering tree, every swaying grass, every flower blooming in sunlight owes its survival to this first alliance. The pioneers of land were not alone. They carried with them invisible companions, hidden allies who made the impossible possible. And so, in the deep silence of the Paleozoic earth, beneath the tender green of moss and the patient stretch of algae, a network was born, a living web that tied soil, plant, and fungus together in an enduring embrace. It is easy to imagine that the world was changed by towering giants and sudden explosions of life. But sometimes, the greatest revolutions happen in silence, in places unseen. The partnership in the soil was one such revolution, a quiet pact that forever altered the course of Earth's story. The first mosses and liverworts had crept onto damp stone, softening the edges of a barren world. Fungi had joined them, weaving delicate networks beneath the surface, offering minerals and support. Yet for plants to truly belong on land, they needed more than fragile mats and clinging filaments. They needed to hold on. They needed to anchor themselves against wind, against rain, against the endless pull of gravity that sought to drag them back into the sea. And so, slowly, quietly, they learned to grip the earth. At first, the anchoring came in simple forms, rhizoids, thread-like filaments reaching into cracks of stone or into damp soil. These were not roots as we know them today, but they were beginnings. Picture a tuft of moss clinging to a cliff face after a heavy rain. Its rhizoids snake into crevices, tiny fingers reaching into the unseen, holding the plant steady as the water rushes past. They are not strong in isolation, but together, in numbers, they bind the moss to its place. They whisper to the rock, "We are here, and we will not be moved." Over time, anchoring grew more sophisticated. Some plants began to develop true roots, tissues that not only secured them, but also drew water and nutrients more efficiently. Roots were more than anchors, they were explorers. They probed the soil, seeking hidden reservoirs of moisture, mining minerals from deep within the earth. Where once a plant could only cling to damp stone, now it could thrive in drier places, reaching down to sip from underground veins. Imagine kneeling beside one of the earliest vascular plants, a spindly stem no taller than your hand. Its roots, delicate yet determined, spread into the soil like a network of threads. Each rootlet absorbs moisture, each one clutches grains of sediment, binding the earth together. Above, the stem lifts into the air, fragile yet upright, a pioneer holding its ground. The roots give it courage, the confidence to rise higher, to face the sun. This anchoring did more than steady plants, it reshaped the land itself. Roots pried into stone, splitting it apart grain by grain. As they grew and died, they left behind organic matter that mingled with dust and sand. Soil deepened, darkened, and enriched. What had once been lifeless rock began to hum with fertility. Plants were no longer merely guests upon the land, they were its builders. With every root that grew, the land grew softer, richer, and more welcoming to life. The presence of roots also slowed the restless motion of earth. Rivers that once ran wild now curved gently, their banks secured by tangles of roots. Rain that once slipped away into gullies now lingered, absorbed into soil that held it like a sponge. The land began to remember water, to hold it close, to share it back slowly. In this way, plants did not only anchor themselves, they anchored the earth itself. There was a poetry to this new stability. Imagine a hillside after a summer storm. Rain pours down in sheets, carrying soil with it, tearing rivulets through the slope. But where plants grow, the roots hold firm. The soil stays, the water trickles more gently, and life persists. The hillside no longer crumbles away into the river. Instead, it becomes a place where life can flourish again and again. Anchoring also allowed plants to grow taller. With steady foundations, stems could reach further toward the sun, competing for light in ways algae never could. Each centimeter gained was a triumph, each leaf held aloft a declaration. This is our home now, and we will claim it. Soon, these upward ambitions would reshape the skyline of Earth, turning bare horizons into green silhouettes. And yet, even in their humility, the earliest rooted plants carried a grandeur of their own. They did not roar or stride, they clung quietly, patiently, but their grip was transformative. They turned instability into permanence, barren landscapes into fertile ground. In the gentle curling of roots into soil, they rewrote the destiny of Earth. So when we think of anchoring, let us not imagine only roots as tools of survival. Let us see them as instruments of creation, threads that stitched together stone and soil, that held the earth steady, that gave life its foothold on land. The first anchors were not just for plants, they were for the world itself, and through them, the greening of Earth took its next step forward. Life in the ocean had always been cradled by water. For algae, every cell was bathed in it, every need instantly met by the currents that flowed around them. But on land, water was fickle. It came in bursts of rain, in passing streams, in mists that clung to stone. It could not be trusted to remain. For plants to thrive beyond the damp edges of shorelines, they had to solve a profound problem: how to hold water within themselves, how to drink from the sky and carry its gift through their bodies. Imagine standing on an early Paleozoic plain after a storm. Rain has fallen and the rocks glisten with moisture. Puddles dot the land, shallow pools shimmering in the sun. Mosses thrive in these moments, drinking greedily through their tiny leaves, their whole bodies soaking in the gift. But the sun is relentless. Within hours, the puddles vanish, the stones dry, and the delicate mosses shrink back, waiting for the next shower. Survival is possible this way, but it is fragile. Something new was needed, something that would allow plants to step further from the safety of constant dampness. The answer came in the form of vessels, microscopic tubes that carried water from the ground upward, from roots to stems to leaves. These vascular tissues were among the most revolutionary innovations in Earth's history. Imagine them as rivers within the plant, flowing not with rainwater alone, but with life itself. They were the hidden highways that allowed plants to stand tall and remain green, even as the land around them dried. The first of these tissues was simple, narrow channels running through stems. They were not yet perfect, but they were enough. With them, plants could draw moisture from the soil and send it upward, defying gravity. Each droplet of water carried with it dissolved minerals, nourishing every cell. For the first time, plants were not just drinking with their surfaces, they were drinking from within. Pause for a moment and picture such a plant. It rises from the damp ground, its slender stalk reaching a hand's width into the air. Beneath the soil, its roots sip from hidden reserves. Within its stem, water pulses upward in invisible streams, pulled by the power of the sun above. On its tiny leaves, the sun's warmth draws water outward in vapor, and in that draw, more water is pulled from below. It is a cycle, both fragile and powerful, one that would one day sustain forests 100 feet tall. Learning to drink from the sky was not without cost. Water loss became a constant danger. The open air was harsh, drying, and plants risked withering under its gaze. To protect themselves, they developed new defenses: waxy coatings on leaves, pores that could open and close, tissues that stored water for lean times. Each adaptation was a quiet triumph, another whisper of resilience in a world that demanded it. The presence of vascular tissues changed not only individual plants, but entire landscapes. Where once life hugged only the damp edges of rivers and pools, it could now stretch further inland. Plants could rise above their neighbors, casting shade, shaping microclimates, altering winds. The land began to look different, not just scattered patches of moss, but stands of upright greenery, small forests of stems and fronds drinking from the sky itself. And with this innovation came a new music to the world. Rain, once fleeting, now lingered in the veins of plants. It fell as drops, seeped into soil, and then rose again through stems, carried into leaves, released as mist back into the air. The cycle of water was no longer only Earth's affair, it was now shared with plants. They became part of the planet's breathing, part of the rhythm of rain and cloud and sky. Imagine walking through one of these early landscapes. The air is damp with the scent of rain. Delicate stems sway in the breeze, their fronds lifted toward the light. If you pressed your ear close enough, perhaps you would hear it, the faint, hidden rush of water coursing upward, a river inside a stem, a song of survival carried from root to leaf. It is the sound of plants learning to live not just beside water, but with water carried in their very being. This ability would change everything. It would allow plants to rise taller, to spread wider, to colonize lands once thought too dry. It would feed the growth of forests, the creation of soils, the shaping of entire continents into green worlds. With vessels in their veins, plants were no longer guests of the rain, they were masters of its gift, drinking from the sky and carrying it into the future. The land had known light in its purest form for billions of years. Sunlight poured down upon stone, upon water, upon dust and sand, unhindered and unbroken. Shadows existed, of course, cast by cliffs, by boulders, by mountains, but never by living things. That was about to change. With vascular tissues carrying water through their bodies and roots holding them steady, plants began to rise above the ground, lifting their green fronds into the air. And with that rise came something new: shade. Picture an early Paleozoic plain where moss and liverworts still sprawl across damp soils. Now in their midst stand taller forms, plants with stems strengthened by lignin, their bodies firmer, their fronds reaching higher toward the sun. They are not yet trees as we would know them, but they are giants compared to the carpets of moss around them. Imagine stems as high as your waist, then higher, as tall as you are, perhaps taller still. They stretch upward like living pillars, slender but proud, drinking deeply from the soil and feeding on the endless sun above. For the first time, sunlight does not fall evenly upon the ground. Instead, it filters through these green bodies, breaking into dappled patterns of light and shadow. Beneath them, the earth feels different, cooler, gentler, sheltered from the harshness of the direct sun. It is the first forest canopy, simple and sparse, but enough to create new worlds below. The shadows changed everything. For the plants themselves, it meant competition. Those who grew taller drank in more sunlight, casting shade on those beneath. Height became an advantage, a path to survival, and so the race upward began. But for the world at large, the arrival of shadow brought diversity. In the dim, sheltered spaces, new life found refuge. Moisture lingered longer in the shade, protecting delicate plants from the scorching heat. Spores could rest safely on damp soils, their fragile beginnings shielded by leafy canopies. Close your eyes and imagine standing among these early vascular plants. The air hums with humidity, for the leaves above breathe out water vapor into the atmosphere. Droplets cling to fronds, catching the light in glimmers of silver. Around you, the ground is soft and dark, nourished by fallen plant matter. Above, the stems sway gently, their shadows stretching across the land like the brushstrokes of a painter. It is quiet here, but not barren. It is the hush of a world beginning to fill with hidden corners, with layered spaces, with green upon green. These first shadows were the promise of forests to come. They created microclimates, pockets of air cooler and wetter than the open plain. They slowed winds, caught rainfall, and softened the impact of storms. In their shade, the earth began to feel alive in a new way, layered and textured, rich with contrasts. And for the animals of the time, the tiny invertebrates exploring damp soil, the first insects creeping among moss. This shade offered havens. Here they could hide from the drying sun, nestle beneath fallen fronds, and live within the protection of green towers. Without knowing it, the plants were not only shaping the land, but also shaping the possibilities for countless other forms of life. The growth of tall plants also carried symbolic weight. No longer were plants mere carpets hugging the earth. They were reaching skyward, lifting the land's voice into the air. From above, the plains no longer looked barren and flat. They shimmered with vertical life, green spires casting their patterns upon the ground. The skyline of Earth was changing, softened now not only by mountains and cliffs, but by living towers of stem and leaf. And in their rise, they hinted at what was yet to come. Taller, stronger, more complex plants would follow, true trees with trunks and branches, vast forests that would darken the land beneath their canopies. But the story began here, with the first vascular pioneers lifting themselves upward, casting the first living shadows upon the ground. These shadows were not just darkness, they were the first cool shelters, the first softening of a sunlit world. They were the outlines of forests not yet born, the silhouettes of futures waiting in seed and spore. The earth was learning a new language, written in shade and green. And from this moment onward, the land would never again be without the comfort of leafy shadows. The land was greening little by little. Mosses softened the stone, roots anchored the soil, and vascular plants lifted themselves toward the sun. But the most profound gift plants brought to the earth was not their shade, nor their roots, nor even their beauty. It was their breath. Long before plants arrived on land, oxygen already lingered in the atmosphere, born from the labor of cyanobacteria and algae in the oceans. But on the continents, the air felt thin, harsher, less forgiving. With the spread of plants across Earth's surface, the atmosphere itself began to change. Every frond, every stem, every leaf lifted toward the sky carried within it the quiet miracle of photosynthesis. With each breath of sunlight, plants inhaled carbon dioxide and exhaled oxygen, weaving the air into something new. Picture an early morning on a Paleozoic plain. The first rays of sun fall across a patch of green stems, their surfaces glistening with dew. As the light warms them, the plants stir into action. Tiny cells deep inside their tissues awaken, capturing the sun's energy, splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen, and stitching carbon into sugar. Invisible to the eye, oxygen drifts out of the leaves, joining the air, molecule by molecule, moment by moment. The plain itself seems to sigh, as though the earth has taken a deeper breath. This transformation did not happen all at once. It was slow, patient, the work of countless generations. But over millions of years, the air grew richer, denser, and more nourishing. Oxygen filled the lungs of the atmosphere, rising to levels far beyond what the oceans alone had achieved. For the first time, the land itself became a great engine of air, feeding the skies with breath. The change was profound. With more oxygen, life could grow larger, stronger, more complex. Insects that once crept low among moss could soon stretch their wings and take flight, some growing to sizes unimaginable today. Amphibians venturing onto land found air that filled their lungs with ease. Every creature that drew breath, every insect that fluttered, every animal that walked would forever be bound to this gift of plants, their endless exhalation, their quiet generosity to the world. But this was not only a gift for animals. Oxygen also reshaped the very feel of the earth. Fires, once impossible on a world with too little oxygen, now became a force of nature. Lightning striking dry plants could spark flames that roared across the land, clearing old growth, recycling nutrients, and opening spaces for new life. The cycle of fire and regrowth, destruction and renewal became part of the story of life itself. And it was only possible because plants breathed into the sky. Close your eyes and imagine standing in a grove of early vascular plants. Around you, delicate stems rise into the light. Their fronds unfurl, casting dappled shade. You take a breath, and though you are a visitor from another time, the air feels sweet, fresh, alive. You sense the plants exhaling around you, giving more than they take, filling the world with a gift that will sustain countless generations, yet unborn. In their breath, plants also reshaped the climate. By pulling carbon dioxide from the air, they cooled the earth, softening extremes and creating conditions in which forests could flourish. The balance of gases shifted, and with it, the rhythm of storms, the patterns of winds, the nature of the skies. Every breath of every plant was part of a larger harmony, a planetary song that would echo across epochs. What is most remarkable is how quiet it all was. No fanfare marked the rising oxygen, no thunder announced the shift. It was the work of leaves trembling in the wind, of fronds swaying gently in sunlight, of cells tirelessly spinning light into life. A symphony of silence shaping the destiny of worlds. Today, we breathe the inheritance of that ancient labor. Every inhale we take is filled with the legacy of Paleozoic plants. Every breath is a reminder that long ago, delicate stems and mossy carpets lifted their fronds to the sky and began to change the very air itself. The earth was learning to breathe anew, not through oceans alone, but through the green skin of land. And in that breath, the stage was set for the blossoming of life in forms more wondrous than the world had ever seen. Life had already taken bold steps onto land. Mosses softened stone, roots anchored soil, and vascular stems lifted their fronds toward the sun. The air itself had been transformed by the breath of plants, sweetened with oxygen. Yet one great challenge remained: how to endure across distance, how to send life outward into new places where roots had not yet dug and fronds had not yet unfurled. The answer was found in the smallest of packages, spores, and eventually the earliest whispers of seeds. Imagine standing beside a patch of early plants after a summer rain. Their stems sway gently in the breeze, their tips crowned with delicate capsules. Within each capsule lie countless microscopic spores, each one a tiny fragment of possibility. The wind stirs, the capsule bursts, and the air fills with a cloud of dust, so fine it seems almost invisible. But this dust is alive. Each speck carries the instructions of a plant, the potential to settle in some damp hollow, to take root, to begin again. Spores were the first great travelers of the plant kingdom. They were light, carried easily by wind, drifting over rivers, across plains, sometimes for miles. They were resilient, shielded by coats that protected them from dryness and sun. Where water lingered, where shade and soil met, spores could awaken, sprouting into new colonies of green. In this way, plants spread across the continents, patch by patch, expanding far beyond the reach of creeping roots alone. Picture the scene of such a spread. A gust of wind sweeps across a Paleozoic valley, carrying spores like unseen snow. Some settle upon the damp banks of a stream, others catch in the crevices of a shaded rock, still others land far away, where no green has yet grown. Days pass, rains return, and in those places, delicate filaments emerge, tiny beginnings of plants, fragile yet determined. From a single puff of spores, a new world begins to bloom. But spores, for all their promise, had their limits. They needed moisture to survive, to awaken, to complete their cycle of life. The dry expanses of land still stood as barriers, wide deserts where spores perished before they could take root. Nature, as always, experimented. Some plants began to enclose their offspring in sturdier cases, coats that held not only protection but nourishment. These were the first seed-like structures, humble and primitive, but revolutionary. Imagine holding one in your hand, a small speck barely visible against your palm. Within it lies not only the blueprint of life, but also a store of food, a tiny packed lunch to sustain the embryo when it awakens. It can endure longer journeys, survive harsher droughts, and wait patiently for the right conditions. It is more than a fragment of potential. It is a promise, a future folded neatly inside a shell. Seeds and the spores that came before them reshaped the possibilities of life on land. With them, plants no longer needed to remain bound to the constant embrace of water. They could reach into drier lands, cross greater distances, and survive harsher seasons. Reproduction was no longer only a matter of chance in damp soil, it was a strategy, deliberate and enduring. This innovation carried a quiet poetry. The plants, which had once lived only in the present moment, clinging to water, drinking rain, spreading slowly by growth, now reached into the future. In every spore released, in every seed tucked safely in its coat, there was hope carried forward. Life had found a way not only to live, but to plan, to imagine a tomorrow, to scatter futures across the earth like starlight across the sky. And so the winds of the Paleozoic grew full of life's whispers. Clouds of spores shimmered in the sun, drifting unseen yet unstoppable. The ground became dotted with new colonies, each one a fresh attempt, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of green. The earliest seeds lay waiting, quiet but indomitable, their patience unmatched. Together, they expanded the reach of plants, carrying their presence into lands that had never known the touch of green. Close your eyes and imagine this moment. A plain once barren now hums with possibility. Spores drift like dust motes in golden light. Tiny seedlings push their way through soil, stretching tender leaves skyward. The air is alive with promise, with futures carried on the wind. The earth is no longer just home to plants where water lingers. It is becoming a world where green can find its way anywhere. The seeds of the future had been sown, quite literally, and with them, Earth itself had stepped into a new chapter, a chapter where life would not only survive, but spread, endure, and thrive across every corner of land. The land was no longer barren. Mosses had spread their carpets, vascular stems had lifted into the air, spores and early seeds had carried life across the continents. But now the world prepared to welcome its first great forests, woven not of oaks or pines, those would come much later, but of ferns, horsetails, and their towering kin. They were the kings and queens of the Paleozoic Green Age, filling valleys and swamps with leafy abundance. Close your eyes and step with me into one of these fern-filled kingdoms. The air is thick and warm, heavy with humidity, for these were the days of vast wetlands and rain-soaked climates. Beneath your feet, the soil is soft, dark and rich, built from countless generations of moss and decayed plants. Around you rise stems taller than a person, some stretching as high as 10 meters into the sky. Their fronds unfurl above like emerald umbrellas, arching and curling in intricate patterns. Light filters through their lacy leaves, scattering into golden shards that dance upon the ground. The world is alive with textures here. The trunks of giant horsetails stand in clustered groves, their ribbed stalks shining with dew. Towering club mosses, some tree-like in their stature, rise above the canopy, their scaly trunks capped with spirals of leaves. And everywhere the ferns flourish, their fronds carpeting the land in green layers, from the tallest canopies to the smallest understories. It is a world without flowers, without blossoms or fruits, yet its beauty is undeniable. It is a world of fronds and spores, of stems and shadows, lush and timeless. Walk slowly through this kingdom, and you would hear its voice. The soft rustle of fronds swaying in the wind, the drip of condensation falling from leaves, the steady hum of insects weaving through the greenery. Beneath the canopy, the air feels cooler, protected by shade, though the humidity clings to your skin like a blanket. It is as though the plants themselves are breathing around you, exhaling moisture and oxygen into the world. Every inhale you take is rich, heavy, almost intoxicating, a reminder that these forests were great engines of air. The ferns and their kin were not delicate. They were bold builders of ecosystems, covering vast stretches of land and turning wetlands into green labyrinths. Their roots bound the soil, their fallen fronds enriched it, and their sheer abundance created new homes for life. Amphibians basked in their shade, insects climbed their stems, and soon, entire food webs flourished within the shelter of the fern kingdoms. It was as if the earth had at last clothed itself, draping its body in a robe of green woven with fronds and stems. There was grandeur here, but also intimacy. Kneel beside a small patch of ground, and you would see miniature ferns sprouting in delicate curls, their fronds coiled like sleeping animals, slowly unfurling as they reached for light. Touch them, and their leaves would feel soft, intricate, like lace crafted by the hands of time. Even the smallest details in these forests spoke of patience and resilience, of a slow and steady claim upon the land. These fern kingdoms were also alchemists of time. In their lush swamps, where the air was heavy and decomposition slow, fallen plants accumulated in thick layers. Over millions of years, these layers would be pressed and buried, transformed into the coal seams that fuel human fires today. Every glowing ember in a hearth, every flame flickering in the dark, carries within it the memory of these Paleozoic forests, the breath of ferns and horsetails captured long ago. But in their own age, the ferns were not fuel for distant futures. They were life itself, spreading across continents, painting Earth in shades of green deeper and richer than ever before. They were symbols of resilience, thriving without flowers or seeds as we know them, relying on spores carried by wind and water to continue their lineage. And yet, their strategy was enough. It was more than enough. It created worlds. Pause for a moment within one of these forests. Above you, fronds arch like cathedral ceilings, catching the sunlight in delicate patterns. Around you, the air shimmers with moisture, alive with buzzing insects and the croak of amphibians hidden in the shade. Beneath your feet, the soil is damp and spongy, full of roots and threads of fungi weaving unseen networks. It feels eternal, timeless, as though you have stepped into the living heart of the Paleozoic world. The fern kingdoms were Earth's first great forests, the first true green empires. They taught the land what it meant to be clothed in abundance, to hum with life from root to canopy. They prepared the soil, enriched the air, and welcomed the creatures that came to dwell among them. They were not the final chapter of Earth's forests, but they were the first, and their legacy lingers still in every fern that curls open in morning light, in every horsetail that grows quietly by a stream. The Earth was no longer only a place of stone and shadow. It was a living kingdom ruled by fronds, and in the hush of their forests, beneath their arching green canopies, the world took a deep, steady breath of life. The fern kingdoms had transformed the land, weaving a tapestry of green across valleys and wetlands. Their fronds arched high, their spores drifted on the wind, and their roots enriched the soil. Yet even amidst this abundance, nature yearned to climb higher. The race toward the light had already begun, and the next step in this journey was nothing short of revolutionary: the rise of trees. Imagine walking through a Paleozoic swamp at dawn. Mist lingers between tall ferns, droplets sparkle on horsetail stems, and the air is damp and heavy with oxygen. In the distance, you see something different: taller, sturdier forms rising above the fronds. These are not delicate stems swaying in the breeze, but trunks woody, thick, and strong. They do not bend easily, nor do they topple when the wind pushes. They stand firm, like living pillars, reaching higher than any plant before them. These are the first trees. The secret to their height lay in lignin, a tough, durable substance that stiffened their tissues and made wood possible. With lignin in their veins, plants were no longer limited to fragile stalks. They could rise higher, their trunks thickening into columns that could support branches, fronds, and eventually leaves far above the ground. Where once the tallest plants had barely reached a person's height, now some soared 20, 30, even 40 meters into the sky. Step closer to one of these giants. Its trunk is rough, patterned with scars where old branches have fallen away. At its base, roots sprawl wide, gripping deep into the soil, anchoring it against storms and floods. Look upward, and you see its crown, spreading branches crowned with leafy fronds, casting shade over everything below. The sunlight that once fell freely upon moss and ferns is now filtered through layers of green, creating a dim and sheltered world beneath the canopy. The rise of trees changed everything. Forests became layered worlds, with distinct floors and ceilings. At the top, crowns of leaves captured the sun's energy, forming canopies that swayed in the wind. Below them, an understory thrived in dappled light, ferns, mosses, and horsetails weaving dense carpets of green. And beneath even that, the forest floor grew dark and humid, a hidden realm of roots, fungi, and creatures scuttling through shadows. For the first time, life on land existed not just across space, but across vertical layers, from canopy to soil. The trees also reshaped the air. Their vast leaves drew in enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, exhaling oxygen in return. Oxygen levels soared to heights never seen before or since, enriching the atmosphere and fueling the growth of insects so large they seem almost mythical to us now. Dragonflies with wingspans of 2 feet drifted between the trunks, and millipedes longer than a person curled through the undergrowth. The forests were not quiet. They hummed and clicked and buzzed with life, a living orchestra beneath the towering green. But trees offered more than air. Their woody bodies endured long after death, falling to the forest floor where they became part of the soil, or sinking into swamps where they would be buried and transformed into coal. In this way, trees became architects of both the present and the future. They built habitats for countless creatures, and they left behind the fuel that would one day shape human history. Pause here in one of these forests. The trunks rise like pillars around you, so tall that their crowns seem to merge with the sky. Shafts of light filter through, illuminating drifting motes of dust and spores. The air is cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of earth. Beneath your feet, roots spread in tangled webs, and mushrooms sprout from fallen logs. It feels sacred, like a cathedral built not by hands, but by time itself. The rise of trees was not only a biological event, it was an aesthetic one. The earth, once bare and open, had grown walls and ceilings of living wood. The skyline was forever altered, painted now with silhouettes of trunks and crowns instead of stone and sky alone. The planet was dressed in forests, cloaked in shade, rich with depth and mystery. And perhaps most profoundly, the rise of trees changed the way life moved through the world. Creatures that once wandered exposed plains now found shelter under canopies. Insects nested in bark and fronds, amphibians rested in the cool damp of roots, and the forest itself became a sanctuary, offering niches and homes to countless beings. From mosses on stone to towering trunks in the sky, the story of plants had reached a new chapter. The earth was no longer only green, it was majestic. The rise of trees crowned the land with grandeur, lifting life high into the air, and forever reshaping the stage upon which evolution would unfold. The rise of trees had lifted life to new heights, their trunks stretching skyward like living pillars, their crowns spreading wide into the heavens. But it was not only their height that changed the world, it was what they created by standing together. When trees gathered in great numbers, their crowns interlaced, forming canopies that transformed the land below into something entirely new, the first great green roofs of Earth. Imagine walking into one of these early forests. Above you, branches and fronds weave together in a living ceiling, filtering the sunlight into patterns of gold and shadow. The air beneath is cooler, softer, carrying the smell of damp earth and fallen leaves. Every step feels cushioned by layers of moss and decayed plant matter, spongy beneath your feet. You look upward, but the sky is hidden, replaced by endless green. This is the world of the canopy, a kingdom not just of trunks and roots, but of layers upon layers of life. The canopy itself was alive with activity. Leaves stretched wide to catch the sun, overlapping in dense networks that captured nearly every ray. They breathed together, exhaling moisture and oxygen into the atmosphere, turning the forest into a vast lung. Mist rose from their surfaces, creating microclimates of humidity, gentle rain clouds born from leaves themselves. It was here, high above the ground, that the forest gathered its strength and shared it with the world. Beneath the canopy, life unfolded in new ways. Where once the ground was scorched by sunlight, now it was shaded and cool. Plants adapted to these dimmer conditions, carpeting the forest floor in ferns, mosses, and fungi that thrived in the quiet gloom. Pools of water lingered longer in the shade, creating habitats for amphibians. Insects darted in and out of the filtered light, buzzing through shafts of sun that slipped between the leaves. The canopy created not just shelter, but diversity, a patchwork of conditions that allowed countless forms of life to find their place. The presence of layers was a revolution. The forest now had levels, each with its own character. At the top, crowns of leaves basked in sunlight, drinking deeply of the sky. Just below, an understory of smaller trees and shrubs stretched upward, reaching for the light that trickled through. And at the bottom lay the forest floor, dark and rich, a world of roots, fungi, and shadow. For the first time, the earth was not just two-dimensional, not just land and sky, it was vertical, a world of depth and shelter. Listen for a moment to this layered symphony. High above, the canopy rustles in the wind, a soft ocean of green waves. Drops of water fall from leaf to leaf, creating a gentle rhythm of dripping that echoes below. Insects hum through shafts of sunlight, their wings catching the glow. On the floor, the air is hushed, damp, carrying the earthy scent of decay and renewal. The forest is not quiet, it breathes, it hums, it murmurs, but its sound is steady, a deep and timeless lullaby. The canopy also transformed the cycles of the earth. Rainfall no longer struck the ground with violence. Instead, it trickled gently, slowed by countless leaves. The soil beneath was protected from erosion, held firm by roots and cushioned by layers of fallen fronds. Winds, once harsh and biting, softened as they passed through trunks and branches. Storms still raged, but the forests absorbed their force, cradling the land in resilience. And as forests grew denser, the canopies stretched further, turning valleys and plains into green seas. From a distance, the horizon itself shifted. Where once bare rock met the sky, now endless forests stood, their crowns merging into a single vast canopy that rippled in the wind like a living ocean. The earth, once naked, now wore a cloak of green. In these canopies, life found sanctuary. Amphibians rested in shaded pools, shielded from the drying sun. Insects nested in bark and branches, their numbers swelling in this new world of niches. Fungi thrived in the dark soil, weaving unseen networks that fed the roots. The canopy was more than shelter, it was a home, a community, a layered sanctuary for life of every scale. Pause for a moment beneath those ancient crowns. Look upward at the filtered light, at the endless patterns of shadow dancing on the ground. Breathe in the air, heavy with oxygen, cool and damp, flavored with green. This is the gift of the canopy, the world made deeper, gentler, richer by the shade of trees. The earth had entered a new age. No longer flat and exposed, it was a world of ceilings and floors, of hidden places and quiet sanctuaries. The forest canopies had arrived, and with them, life on land would never again be the same. The forest canopies reached high, their crowns swaying like green oceans above the land. Beneath them, the air grew cool, the light grew dim, and the ground softened. But the most important transformation happened quietly, almost invisibly, underfoot. It was here, beneath layers of ferns and trees, that the soil itself was being born, soil richer and deeper than the earth had ever known. Before plants, the land had been harsh and thin, bare rock dominated, with only shallow dust and scattered sediments where erosion left its mark. Without roots to hold it, without organic matter to enrich it, the ground was poor, unable to sustain much life. But as forests spread, a miracle unfolded. Plants, in their endless cycles of growth and decay, began to create new earth beneath them. They became the world's first great soil builders. Picture the forest floor of a Paleozoic swamp. Above, towering trunks stretch skyward, their crowns lost in a haze of green. Below, the ground is littered with fallen fronds, broken branches, and whole trees toppled by storms. These bodies of plants do not vanish quickly. They gather in heaps, darkening the soil beneath. Moss grows upon them, fungi creep across their surfaces, insects nibble at their edges. Slowly, steadily, they are broken down into humus, the dark, fertile substance that nourishes new growth. Every leaf that falls becomes part of this cycle. Each frond that withers feeds the soil below. Roots carry minerals upward from stone, and when those plants die, the minerals return to the ground, richer than before. The soil deepens, darkens, thickens into layers that can hold water, cradle seeds, and sustain forests. It is a quiet alchemy, turning death into life, turning decay into fertility. Close your eyes and kneel to touch the ground in one of these forests. Beneath your fingertips lies a damp, spongy earth, alive with the threads of fungi and the burrows of tiny creatures. Pull back a handful, and it smells rich, earthy, full of hidden life. This is not mere dust or sand, it is soil, a tapestry woven of roots and leaves, of life and death, of centuries upon centuries of renewal. It is the memory of the forest, preserved beneath your hand. The soil was more than a foundation, it was a gift. It held water like a sponge, feeding roots through long, dry days. It sheltered seeds, protecting them as they waited to awaken. It became a storehouse of nutrients, a reservoir of memory, ensuring that even in times of hardship, life could continue. In every handful of soil lay the work of countless plants, the echoes of seasons past, the promise of futures yet to come. This new fertility invited diversity. Where once only the hardiest moss could survive, now whole communities of plants could thrive. Ferns spread wider, horsetails grew denser, and trees stretched taller, their roots reaching deep into the soil that their ancestors had helped create. Animals, too, were drawn into these rich lands. Amphibians laid their eggs in shaded pools, insects burrowed through leaf litter, and the soil became alive with motion, a hidden kingdom beneath the forest floor. The soil builders also changed the shape of the earth itself. Rivers slowed as their banks, bound by roots, resisted erosion. Plains grew fertile, dark with layers of decayed plant matter. Swamps deepened with peat, storing away the carbon of fallen forests. Over millions of years, these deposits would compress into coal, a silent treasury of ancient sunlight buried beneath the earth's skin. The ground was no longer only a stage upon which life acted, it was now a partner in the play, shaped and enriched by the plants that grew upon it. Pause here for a moment in the dim light of a Paleozoic forest. Listen to the quiet patter of rain dripping from leaves above. Smell the earthy richness rising from the ground, damp and alive. Beneath you, beneath the roots and fallen trunks, a great work is unfolding. Soil is being made, patiently, endlessly, turning barren dust into fertile ground. It is a process so humble, so silent, that it might go unnoticed. Yet it is one of the most important transformations in Earth's history. The soil builders had arrived. With each fallen frond, with each decayed trunk, with each root drawing water from the depths, they reshaped the ground beneath them. They made Earth not just livable, but abundant. They gave the land memory, resilience, and the power to feed generations yet to come. And so, step by step, the forests deepened their claim upon the land. The earth itself was changing from the inside out, its skin softened and enriched by the quiet labor of plants. The soil was no longer just stone ground to dust. It was life woven into earth, the silent foundation of the green world to come. Water had always sculpted the earth. Long before plants, rain fell upon bare stone, carving gullies, splitting cliffs, and carrying sediments down to the sea. Rivers rushed freely, swift and restless, unbound by roots or soil. Storms battered the land, and when they ended, the waters often fled quickly, leaving behind dryness and dust. But as plants spread across the continents, their presence transformed this ancient dance. Rain no longer touched the land as it once had. Rivers no longer flowed in the same way. The very cycles of water were reimagined by green. Imagine standing in a Paleozoic forest during a storm. Clouds gather, heavy and gray, their bellies rumbling with thunder. Rain begins to fall, first in scattered drops, then in sheets that sweep across the canopy. In a world without plants, this rain would have struck the ground violently, scattering soil, carving deep channels, washing away the land. But here, in the shelter of trees and ferns, the rain meets a gentler fate. The first drops splash against leaves high in the canopy, spreading into rivulets that run down stems and branches. Some droplets cling to fronds, glistening like jewels before slipping slowly to the ground. Others evaporate before they fall, returning to the sky as mist. Only a fraction of the storm reaches the soil directly, and when it does, it lands softened, filtered, slowed. The forest has caught the rain in its embrace, cradling it, tempering its violence. Roots too play their part. They drink deeply from the wet soil, storing moisture within trunks and stems. They bind the ground, preventing floods from carrying it away. In wetlands, roots weave dense mats that act like sponges, holding water long after the storm has passed. Where once rain vanished swiftly, it now lingered, seeping slowly back into rivers and streams. Forests became reservoirs, storing the sky's gift and releasing it gently, steadily into the land. This change reshaped the rivers themselves. Once wild and unruly, rivers now flowed with greater patience. Their banks, anchored by roots, no longer collapsed as easily. Their courses grew more stable, winding through valleys softened by vegetation. In forests, streams trickled steadily even in dry seasons, fed by the slow release of water stored in soil and roots. The presence of plants brought rhythm to the rivers, turning floods into flows, chaos into balance. Pause for a moment beside such a stream. Its surface glimmers in the filtered light of the canopy. Around you, ferns lean toward the water, their fronds brushing its surface. Amphibians rest in shaded pools, their bodies cooled by the gentle trickle. Insects skim across the water's skin, darting between patches of sunlight. This stream is not the violent rush of water over bare stone. It is a living ribbon, nourished by the forest, softened by the embrace of green. Forests also began to call the rain itself. Their leaves, by exhaling water vapor, moistened the air, thickening clouds, and inviting storms to return. In this way, plants shaped not only the land but also the skies. Regions once dry grew wetter beneath the breath of forests, their climates softened by the endless exchange of water between leaf and air, root and soil, river and sea. The Earth's atmosphere, its weather, its very moods began to follow the rhythm of plants. And as the rains changed, so too did life. Amphibians found safe breeding grounds in shaded pools. Insects thrived along slow-moving streams. Even the first reptiles, venturing further inland, depended on the stability forests brought to water. The greening of Earth was not just a story of soil and air, but of water reshaped, of rivers tamed, rains softened, and the land itself made habitable through the quiet work of plants. Consider for a moment how profound this was. Rain had always fallen, rivers had always flowed, but until plants spread their roots and raised their crowns, water had been a restless, fleeting visitor. Now it became a companion, a partner of life. Forests held it close, shared it, shaped it, and in return, water nourished them endlessly. Together, they wove a cycle of renewal, one that would sustain the world for millions of years to come. So when you hear rain on leaves, or when you watch a river winding gently through a forest, remember this ancient transformation. Remember the days when the earth first learned to drink differently, when plants reimagined the very movement of water across the land. It was not dramatic thunder or crashing waves that reshaped the planet. It was the quiet work of roots, the patient drip of rain on leaves, the steady rhythm of rivers guided by green hands. For countless ages, the land had been a silent stage, shaped by stone, water, and the slow crawl of plants. But as forests deepened their roots and raised their canopies, a new presence began to stir. Animals, once bound to the seas and rivers, ventured onto land, drawn by the promise of food, shelter, and opportunity. With plants as their hosts and allies, the land began to hum with motion, no longer a quiet green world, but one alive with creatures great and small. Picture a Paleozoic forest just after a storm. The air is damp, heavy with the scent of earth and moss. Mist curls between trunks, drifting lazily in the dim light. On the forest floor, an amphibian stirs. Its slick skin glistens in the filtered sunlight as it hauls itself from the edge of a shaded pool. It breathes deeply, filling lungs with air sweetened by the plant's breath. This amphibian, descendant of fish that once swam shallow rivers, has found a new home among the roots and ferns. Here, the moist soil and calm pools offer safety for eggs, while the canopy above keeps the ground damp and cool. The arrival of amphibians marked a profound shift. They were not explorers in the way we imagine adventurers, but reluctant travelers, pulled from water by necessity, sustained on land by the gifts plants had prepared. They found shelter in the shade of fronds, refuge beneath logs softened by decay, and food in the swarms of insects buzzing through the canopy. For them, the green world was not a frontier, it was a sanctuary. And the insects, oh how they flourished. With plants came spores, leaves, stems, and roots, all offering niches for life. Early insects crept across moss, climbed stems, and burrowed into soil enriched with organic matter. Dragonflies, larger than a human hand, darted through shafts of sunlight, their wings shimmering like stained glass. Millipedes, longer than a person's arm, wound their way across the damp forest floor, feeding on fallen fronds. The oxygen-rich air, thickened by the breath of forests, allowed these creatures to grow larger than their descendants today. The land was alive not just with green, but with the hum, buzz, and crawl of life. Close your eyes and walk with me into this ancient world. You hear the steady drip of water falling from leaves, then a faint rustle, the sound of something moving through the ferns. A dragonfly sweeps past your face, its wings beating with a deep musical hum. Ahead, the soft croak of an amphibian echoes from the edge of a pool. Beneath your feet, the soil shifts with the slow crawl of a millipede, its countless legs tickling the ground as it moves. The forest is no longer silent. It has found its voice in the footsteps, wings, and songs of animals. This arrival was not sudden, nor was it uniform. For millions of years, life experimented, finding new ways to adapt to the green world. Some amphibians ventured further from water, their skins toughening against dryness. Some insects developed wings, rising into the air to explore the canopy above. Spiders and other predators followed, weaving their own strategies into this new web of life. Each adaptation was a step forward, a promise that land was no longer a barren expanse, but a thriving ecosystem where countless lives could unfold. Plants and animals formed a partnership, just as plants had once partnered with fungi. Leaves offered food to herbivores, spores clung to insects for dispersal, and the forests themselves provided shelter for every stage of life. In return, animals helped shape the forests, by feeding on plants, by carrying spores, by burrowing and cycling nutrients back into the soil. It was a dance of reciprocity, as ancient as the roots themselves. Pause for a moment and reflect on the quiet wonder of this transformation. Only a short span of geological time before, the land had been empty, silent, but for the whisper of winds and the trickle of streams. Now it was vibrant, alive with creatures walking, flying, crawling, and singing. The earth was no longer ruled only by stone, water, and green. It had become a stage for movement, for interaction, for stories played out in shade and sunlight. The creatures had arrived. With them, the forests became more than plants alone. They became ecosystems, intricate worlds of interwoven lives. Every amphibian's croak, every insect's hum, every rustle in the leaf litter added to the chorus. The once quiet land had found its voice, and it sang with the music of life. The earth was draped in green. Forest canopies stretched high, ferns and horsetails crowded the wetlands, and amphibians croaked in shaded pools. Yet in some corners of the Paleozoic, the forests grew so dense, so immense, that they became worlds unto themselves, humid, shadowed kingdoms of endless growth. These were the coal swamps, vast wetlands where the air hung heavy with moisture and where the remains of countless plants were preserved in the slow alchemy of time. Imagine stepping into one of these swamps. The air is thick, humid, almost like a warm blanket wrapping around you. Every breath carries the scent of damp earth, rotting wood, and fresh greenery. Around you, towering clubmoss trees, lepidodendron and sigillaria, rise like columns, their trunks patterned with diamond-shaped scars where leaves once grew. Some stretch more than 30 meters tall, their crowns bursting into sprays of foliage that glimmer in the filtered light. Beneath them, tree ferns unfurl their fronds, while giant horsetails cluster in groves along the water's edge. The swamp is crowded, layered, lush beyond imagining. Look closer and you'll see the swamp's surface is alive. Pools of still water reflect the crowns above, broken only by the ripple of amphibians diving below or insects skimming across. The forest floor is carpeted with moss, peat, and fallen fronds that never fully decay. The dampness preserves them, stacking layer upon layer of plant matter into a thick, spongy ground. Every step you take sinks slightly, as though you are walking on the skin of a living sponge. The coal swamps were not silent. Dragonflies the size of hawks buzz overhead, their wings shimmering in the damp light. Millipedes longer than a person curl along fallen trunks, feeding on the endless abundance of decaying leaves. Amphibians croak and slither, some with wide, flat heads peering above the water like sentinels. Life hums, clicks, and stirs in every corner. Yet beneath the liveliness, there is an undertone of stillness, of accumulation. For in these swamps, life does not vanish quickly. It lingers. When trees and ferns died here, their bodies often fell into waterlogged soil where oxygen was scarce. Instead of rotting away, their remains built up as peat, thick, spongy beds of carbon-rich plant matter. Over millions of years, buried under sediments and compressed by the weight of time, this peat would harden into coal. Every fallen trunk, every dropped frond, every mossy carpet contributed to these ancient reserves. In the silence beneath the swamp's surface, the earth was storing energy, locking away the breath of forests for ages yet to come. Pause for a moment and kneel to touch the peat beneath your feet. It is damp, springy, dark, with centuries of fallen leaves. You feel the weight of time in its softness, the memory of countless seasons layered one upon another. Each fragment of plant is a story frozen, waiting for the press of ages to turn it into stone. The coal swamps were not only forests, they were timekeepers, saving sunlight and air in black seams beneath the earth. The presence of these swamps reshaped the earth in their own age as well. They captured enormous amounts of carbon, pulling it from the air and storing it underground. Oxygen levels soared higher than ever before, perhaps to more than 30% of the atmosphere. The world became a place of giant insects, massive amphibians, and fire that burned hotter and faster than in any age since. The coal swamps breathed life into the skies even as they buried their own remains into the soil. From above, the coal swamps must have looked like seas of green, stretching for miles across lowlands and valleys. Their crowns swayed gently in the humid breeze, their waters glittered in the filtered light, and their mists rose each morning like smoke drifting from an endless fire. They were not just forests, they were worlds entire, vast ecosystems where plants and animals intertwined in an eternal cycle of growth and decay. And yet, perhaps the greatest legacy of these swamps lay hidden, buried deep. Long after they vanished, long after the Paleozoic ended, their compressed remains would rise again, not as forests, but as fuel for human hands. Every coal seam burned in furnaces, every glowing ember in hearths, every steam engine powered by coal carries within it the ghosts of these swamps. They are whispers of ferns and club mosses, of horsetails and peat, transformed by time into the black veins of the earth. But here, in their own age, the swamps were not fuel, they were abundance. They were life spilling over itself, layer upon layer, season after season, leaving behind the soft foundations of soil and the dense promise of coal. They were humid, heavy, endless, green cathedrals of growth where earth learned to weave time into stone. The coal swamps sprawled across continents, their ferns and towering club mosses stretching skyward, their roots binding the ground, their fallen bodies layering the soil. But beyond the shade of their fronds, beyond the damp quiet of their pools, their greatest influence drifted unseen, carried on every breeze. It was not their trunks or their spores that most profoundly altered the world, but their breath. the vast exhalation of oxygen that poured into the air, changing the very nature of Earth's sky. Imagine standing in the heart of one of these forests at dawn. Mist curls upward from the swamp, carrying the scent of damp moss and decaying fronds. The air is heavy, almost sweet, rich with oxygen exhaled by the canopy above. Each fern, each club moss, each horsetail lifts its fronds to the sun and in the silence of its cells transforms light into life. They drink carbon dioxide, sip water from the soil, and release oxygen, invisible yet vital, into the atmosphere. Multiply this act by millions, by billions, across endless forests, and the result is astonishing. An Earth whose skies are filled with more oxygen than at any other time in history. By the height of the Carboniferous, oxygen may have reached over 30% of the atmosphere, far greater than today's 21%. Every breath taken then was fuller, richer, more potent. Fires sparked more easily and burned hotter, fueled by the abundance in the air. Creatures grew larger, their bodies emboldened by the wealth of oxygen coursing through their systems. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than a hawk soared above the swamps, their delicate wings shimmering in the sunlight. Millipedes as long as a person coiled slowly through the undergrowth, their countless legs rippling like waves. Amphibians, no longer confined to ponds alone, grew larger and bolder, filling the forests with croaks and splashes. Pause for a moment and breathe in with them. The air is dense, intoxicating, alive with the exhalations of forests. It fills your chest, cool and sweet, carrying the weight of countless fronds breathing together. In this air, your own body would feel different, stronger, energized, almost buoyant. For life in this age, every breath was a gift of the plants, every movement fueled by the invisible labor of forests. The green breath reshaped not only creatures, but the earth itself. Carbon, once heavy in the air, was drawn down into roots, stems, and trunks, and then buried deep beneath swamps as peat and coal. Oxygen rose in its place, filling the atmosphere with vitality. The climate cooled under the drawdown of carbon, giving the world its damp, swampy abundance. The rhythm of Earth systems, the balance of air, fire, water, and soil, was rewritten by the steady work of plants breathing in light and breathing out sky. Even the cycles of fire bore witness to this change. In forests thick with oxygen, lightning strikes could ignite infernos that roared hotter and faster than in any other age. Yet fire itself became part of the balance, clearing space for new growth, recycling nutrients, shaping the patchwork of ecosystems. The forests fed the fires with oxygen, and the fires, in turn, prepared the soil for renewal. It was a delicate dance of destruction and rebirth, carried out beneath skies richer than ever before. Consider how remarkable this transformation truly was. For billions of years, Earth's air had been thin, its oxygen scarce. Creatures lived small, bound by the limitations of breath. But now the land pulsed with abundance, and the skies themselves seemed to sing with vitality. Plants had not only covered the earth with green, they had changed the very air we breathe, ensuring that every future creature, every wingbeat, every footstep, every song would depend upon their gift. Close your eyes and picture it. The forest hums around you, alive with buzzing insects and the croaks of amphibians. Above, the canopy rustles gently in the wind, each leaf releasing a breath into the sky. You inhale deeply, and though you are but a visitor in time, you feel it, the sweetness, the strength, the fullness of the air. This is the green breath, the unseen legacy of forests, the quiet generosity of plants to the world. The earth had been reshaped once again. Where once the land was silent, it now teemed with life. Where once the skies were thin, they now overflowed with oxygen. And at the heart of it all, plants exhaled their gift, day after day, season after season, age after age. The green breath sustained the Paleozoic world, and it still sustains us now. The Paleozoic forests rose, flourished, and fell, their canopies swaying in winds long vanished, their roots drinking from rivers whose courses have long since shifted. And yet, though the plants themselves are gone, their presence lingers still. Pressed into stone, etched into coal, and imprinted upon shale, the forests left behind a record, not in words or songs, but in patterns, impressions, and fragments. These are the echoes in the fossil record, the whispers of green preserved for eternity. Imagine walking through a modern quarry where slabs of rock are split open by careful hands. At first glance, the stone seems blank, its surface plain and gray. But then, in the split, a shape is revealed, the delicate outline of a fern frond, each leaflet preserved in astonishing detail. The frond is darker than the stone around it, a shadow of something that lived more than 300 million years ago. It is as though the forest itself had reached across time to leave behind a signature, a reminder of its presence. The fossil record of the Paleozoic is rich with such echoes. There are ferns etched so clearly that you can still trace the veins of their leaves with your fingertips. There are tree trunks flattened into coal seams, their textures marked with the diamond patterns of lepidodendron. There are spores preserved in shale, microscopic yet enduring, each one a fragment of a forest that once stretched across humid swamps. Some fossils even preserve whole stumps rooted in place, frozen in the positions they once grew, as if the forest were only sleeping, waiting to awaken. Pause for a moment and picture such a stump, fossilized in stone. Its roots spread outward, still gripping the soil of an ancient swamp. Its trunk rises only a short distance before breaking, toppled long ago, yet the mark of its life is undeniable. Around it, layers of sediment tell stories, floods that buried it, time that pressed it, minerals that seeped into its tissues and replaced them with stone. The tree is gone, but its memory endures, carved into the earth itself. The echoes are not silent, they speak, if we know how to listen. A fern imprint tells of shade dappled understories. A coal seam speaks of swampy forests layered in peat. Even the smallest spores whisper of wind, of dispersal, of life carried across great distances. Together, these fragments weave a story of worlds long vanished, of forests that once breathed life into the air, of swamps that laid the foundations of future fuel. There is a cozy wonder in these discoveries. To hold a fossil leaf in your hand is to bridge unimaginable time, to touch a moment that lived hundreds of millions of years before us. Imagine the frond in its prime, unfurling gently in humid light, shimmering with dew. Imagine insects brushing against it, amphibians resting in its shade, the wind carrying its spores. Now in your hand, it is a memory pressed flat, yet still alive in its story. Fossils are not merely stone, they are letters written in the language of time, letters that we are only just learning to read. The fossil record also preserves the passage of change. By studying the layers, we see when certain plants flourished and when they disappeared. We see the rise of ferns, the dominance of clubmoss trees, the emergence of seeds. We see how oxygen levels swelled, how coal deposits formed, how forests spread and retreated. Each layer is a page, each fossil a word, each sequence a chapter in the long book of Earth's green history. Pause again and imagine drifting through one of these forests in its prime. Hear the buzz of dragonflies, the croak of amphibians, the rustle of fronds. Then imagine it vanishing, pressed beneath layers of sediment, transformed over millions of years into the black seams of coal, into the imprints on shale, into fossils hidden deep in rock. Now, millennia later, hands split the stone and the forest whispers again. Its echoes are faint, but they are there, waiting to be heard. The plants of the Paleozoic did not simply live and die, they left legacies written in stone. Their fossils are reminders that the earth remembers. Every leaf, every trunk, every spore that found its way into sediment became a voice carried across time. And when we hold them today, we are not only looking at stone, we are listening to echoes of green, the quiet stories of a world long past. Before plants, Earth's continents were vast, raw, and bare. Wind swept across stone, rivers tore through unanchored soil, and rain vanished quickly into gullies or slid off cliffs into the sea. But with the rise of plants, mosses creeping across stone, ferns arching their fronds, trees lifting crowns into the sky, the planet itself began to change. Slowly, steadily, the Earth remade her face. What had once been a barren, rocky world became something entirely new, a green planet, alive from root to canopy. Imagine gazing down from above, as though soaring on the wings of one of those ancient dragonflies. In ages past, the continents below would have glimmered grey and brown, scarred by cliffs and rivers, broken only by the shimmer of shallow seas. But now, in the age of forests, those same continents wear a cloak of green. Swamps stretch like emerald seas, valleys are thick with ferns, and great stands of club mosses and tree ferns cover the land like living carpets. From the sky, Earth no longer looks like a raw stone, but like a vast, breathing garden. This greening was more than a change in color. It was a transformation of the very rhythms of the planet. Plants softened the climate, pulling carbon dioxide from the sky and exhaling oxygen in its place. They reshaped rainfall, calling storms back to the forests, releasing mist and moisture into the air. They altered rivers, slowing their rush, curving their banks, holding water longer within the soil. They deepened the ground itself, turning dust and rock into fertile soils rich with memory. The earth was no longer merely stone and water. It had become a partner with life, reshaped by the quiet labor of roots and leaves. Close your eyes and picture standing at the edge of one of these vast forests. Before you stretches a horizon painted in green. Trunks rise like pillars, their crowns merging into a canopy that ripples in the wind. Beneath, the air is cool and damp, rich with oxygen. The ground is spongy with centuries of fallen leaves, every step a reminder of cycles long past. The forest hums with insects, echoes with amphibian calls, and stirs with life in every corner. This is no longer the silent land of early Paleozoic ages. It is a living, breathing world. The transformation was not only physical, it was emotional, aesthetic, spiritual. Where once the land had been stark and empty, now it offered comfort, beauty, and refuge. The sight of green softened the harshness of cliffs and valleys. The sound of leaves rustling in the wind added music to the silence of stone. The scent of damp soil and living fronds added depth to the air. Earth had become a place not just of survival, but of wonder. This greening also laid the foundation for all futures to come. The first reptiles, venturing beyond the safety of swamps, walked on soils prepared by plants. Insects, growing larger and more diverse, thrived in forests that offered shelter and food. Amphibians, once bound to the water, found safety in the moist shade of ferns. And much later, long after the Paleozoic ended, mammals and birds, flowers and grasses, and eventually humans would inherit the legacy of this transformation. Every field, every meadow, every garden today is built upon the foundation plants laid in this distant age. Pause for a moment to feel the enormity of this shift. The earth itself, its climate, its air, its soil, its rivers, its very character was reshaped by the rise of plants. Without them, the land might have remained barren, its air thin, its soils poor, its opportunities limited. With them, the earth became something new, a planet alive from surface to sky, capable of sustaining creatures of every shape and size. The greening of Earth was not sudden, nor was it loud. It unfolded slowly, across millions of years, through the quiet labor of mosses, ferns, and trees, and yet, in its patience, it achieved something extraordinary. It took a world of stone and water and transformed it into a sanctuary. It took a barren land and turned it into a planet clothed in life. When we look at our world today, the forests that stretch across continents, the grasses that ripple like oceans, the flowers that brighten every corner, we are looking at the legacy of this transformation. The Earth is not only a planet, it is a garden, and it became one in the Paleozoic when plants claimed the land and remade it forever. The forest had risen, the swamps had spread, and the very air had been remade by the breath of plants. The Earth was no longer barren stone or restless riverbed, it was a living green world. And though the Paleozoic age would eventually give way to upheavals, extinctions, and new chapters of life, the legacy of these first plants was eternal. They had sown the seeds not just of forests, but of the future itself. Imagine standing at the edge of a Carboniferous forest, knowing what we know now. You see ferns unfurling in the mist, dragonflies gliding through golden shafts of light, amphibians croaking in shaded pools. It is beautiful, yes, but it is more than that. It is foundational. Every leaf here, every spore drifting on the wind, every trunk rising skyward is laying groundwork for futures that will stretch hundreds of millions of years beyond this moment. The seeds of legacy are everywhere, hidden in fronds and roots, whispered in spores and woven into soil. One part of their legacy is physical. The coal seams deep beneath our feet are their memory, sunlight stored in carbon-rich layers, waiting in silence. Every forest today still echoes with their strategies, roots seeking water, leaves stretching for light, spores and seeds carrying the promise of renewal. Even the grasses and flowers of later ages trace their lineage back to these Paleozoic pioneers. Without mosses to soften stone, without ferns to build soils, without trees to anchor rivers, the later blossoming of life would have had no foundation. Another part of their legacy is atmospheric. The oxygen-rich air we breathe, the balance of gases that fills our lungs with every inhale, is the gift of plants. The great green breath of the Paleozoic lingers in every molecule we draw into our bodies. Without it, there would be no vast insects, no sprawling reptiles, no mammals or birds, no humans to tell these stories. Plants gave us the sky itself, and their legacy drifts around us every moment of every day. Their legacy is also ecological. By building soils, by shaping rivers, by calling rains, they created the conditions for life to diversify. Amphibians, insects, reptiles all found niches in the world's plants built. Without them, the land would have remained harsh and unstable, unable to support the web of relationships that defines ecosystems. Plants were not just one part of nature, they were the stage upon which nature could unfold. And perhaps most beautifully, their legacy is one of patience and resilience. They did not conquer the land with force or haste. They crept, they clung, they grew, they anchored, they endured. They worked slowly, season after season, eon after eon, until the world was transformed. Their story reminds us that great change often comes quietly, built not in sudden leaps, but in steady, persistent steps. Close your eyes and reflect for a moment. Think of a fern uncurling its frond in the morning light. Think of moss spreading gently across stone. Think of a tree raising its crown toward the sky. Each of these is a gesture begun in the Paleozoic, a movement that has never ceased. The plants of that age may be gone, but their legacy lives on in every leaf, in every forest, in every breath of air. And now here we stand, millions of years later, surrounded by their gifts. Every field of grass, every towering oak, every quiet garden is a descendant of that first green wave. We walk on soils they created, we breathe air they enriched, we live in climates they softened. Their legacy is not distant, it is present, woven into the fabric of every day. The Paleozoic plants did not know what they were building, but we do. They built a world capable of sustaining endless forms of life, a world resilient, diverse, and abundant. They built the earth we inherited. And though ages have passed, extinctions have swept the land, and climates have shifted, the seeds of their legacy endure. So let us end where we began, with gratitude. Gratitude for the mosses that softened stone, for the ferns that wove the first forests, for the trees that raised green crowns into the sky. Gratitude for their breath, their patience, their persistence. For in their quiet labor, they turned Earth into a planet of life. The seeds of their legacy are still with us, still sprouting in every corner of the earth. And as we breathe, as we walk among trees and fields, as we look up at canopies swaying in the wind, we are living inside the story they began. A story of green, a story of breath, a story of Earth itself. The story of land plants is not one of noise or spectacle. It is not a tale of sudden conquest, nor of creatures roaring into dominance. It is the story of quiet guardians, of moss creeping across stone, of ferns arching their fronds, of trees lifting crowns into the sky. It is the story of patience, of persistence, of lives that work slowly yet change everything. Think back to the beginning. The earth was silent then, its land bare and grey, its rivers restless, its air thin. Into that silence came whispers, the algae clinging to shorelines, the mosses anchoring themselves to damp stone, the ferns reaching upward with delicate hands. Their steps were small, almost invisible, but their effect was vast. They clothed the earth, softened her face, and reshaped her breath. Through them, the land became more than stone. It became soil, fertile and deep. It became rivers that flowed gently, rains that lingered, skies that thickened with oxygen. It became forests that sheltered creatures, ecosystems layered with shade and light. It became a planet alive, abundant, and generous. And though the Paleozoic forests themselves have long vanished, their legacy endures. It endures in the coal seams buried beneath mountains, in the fossils etched into stone, in the air we breathe, in the soil beneath our feet. Every tree today, every meadow, every garden is a descendant of their patience. Every breath we take carries their gift. Pause with me for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine standing beneath a canopy of trees in your own time. The leaves rustle softly in the breeze, sunlight filters through in golden fragments, and the ground smells rich and earthy beneath you. This is their legacy, alive and present, a continuation of the story that began so long ago. You are breathing the breath of plants, walking on soil they created, living in the world they built. The quiet guardians are still with us. They line our rivers, blanket our hills, stretch across our continents. They remain as they have always been, patient, persistent, generous. They ask for little, yet they give everything: air, food, shelter, beauty, and balance. They do not roar, yet they sustain every roar. They do not sing, yet they cradle every song. And so, as we close this chapter of the Paleozoic story, let us hold gratitude for the plants, for the moss that clings, for the fern that unfurls, for the tree that lifts its crown to the sky, for the seeds that carry futures across the wind. They are the architects of the Earth's green age, the keepers of soil and sky, the quiet guardians of life. Their story is not finished. It continues around us, in every leaf, in every breath, in every root that twists unseen beneath the ground. To walk in the world is to walk inside their story. To breathe is to join in their legacy. And to look upon a tree, a fern, or even a patch of moss is to glimpse the patience and resilience that turned Earth into a planet of life. So let us end not with silence, but with a quiet reverence for the plants of the Paleozoic, who stepped from water to land, who built forests and swamps, who gave us air and soil and shade. They were and remain the silent shapers of worlds, the quiet guardians of time.